Welcome, everybody. This is Buck Joffrey with the Wealth Formula Podcast. And today I'd like to start out reminding you, visit wealthformula.com for all the resources that you miss out on, including being on my email list, my distribution list. All those things, free books from me, from George Newberry, all sorts of resources available to you at wealthformula.com. So make sure to check that out because you're missing out. I also want to point out to you that there is a course and a mastermind group and a Facebook group, all of this stuff. You can check that all out at wealthformularoadmap.com. And I would love to have you part of a Wealth Formula network. And part of that is also a bi-weekly mastermind call, which I think has been pretty fun for people. I mean, it's nice to have some of these opportunities to talk to one another, etc. Speaking of that, I want to announce to you right now, this is very exciting, the inaugural first ever Wealth Formula meetup, which will be occurring on March 2nd, 2019. That's, of course, this coming March. It's a Saturday in Scottsdale, Arizona, at a hotel over there. I forget what the name is, but anyway, you can check out all of the details at wealthformulaevents.com. That's events with an S, so wealthformulaevents.com. But here's how it's going to roll, okay? So March 1st, I'm going to get there. And whoever else gets there on the 1st, that evening, we're going to meet up for cocktails. The hotel there where the event is. We're going to meet up sort of informally. The next day, tremendous educational opportunity. We've got some great speakers, including the legendary Ken McElroy, Rich Dad Advisor of Real Estate, Rich Dad Advisor for Taxes, Tom Wheelwright, Dave Steele of Western Wealth Capital, which we will talk about more today. We've got Christian Allen, Damian Lupo, and then we're gonna have panel discussions. We're gonna have case studies. We're gonna talk about all the tax strategies that are new to this Trump tax law that people still really aren't taking full advantage of. And then we're gonna go on a bus tour. We're going to go check out a bunch of multifamily properties in the area. And then we finish the day, again, where we started the night before, which is cocktails again, this time on me. And so I want you to check it out. This is a really great opportunity. And, we just haven't done anything live. There's a lot of events out there that just really aren't worth going to. This one will be worth your time. It's dirt cheap too. It's basically you'll be able to tell we are not making any money on this, especially since we've got cocktails, room, a bus tour, and lunch and everything included in this. So once again, check that out at wealthformulaevents.com and come and join us. Say hello, and join Wealth Formula Nation as we bring in the new year. Let's shift a little bit, talking about Western Wealth Capital. Well, let's take a step back in time for a moment, and you can join me as a young medical student back in my 20s. I remember being in medical school thinking that, you know what, I really want to be a surgeon, and the idea of it really appealed to me very much, and probably as much as anything else, because I felt like I had the personality of a surgeon. I wanted that, I was sort of an alpha male. I also felt like, I kind of wanted to be a surgeon. I wanted that person, that persona that followed that. In fact, I ended up in neurosurgery. It shows you how much persona I was actually looking for initially. But, I have to admit, and I don't know that I've really ever admitted this out loud, is that at the time in med school, when I was making this decision to go to surgery, I felt very insecure. You see, growing up, my dad, who's a real estate guy, but he is, and what he was and is about as white collar as they get. I mean, I didn't learn anything about cars. I never put up any shelves. I mean, I didn't hook up the TV. I didn't do anything. I mean, my dad had somebody to do every one of those types of things, and I didn't learn from him because he didn't know how to do anything. So the only reason I had to think that I was, any good with my hands at all was the fact that I actually excelled in hand-eye coordination sports like ice hockey. And some may not call it a sport, but I will. Table tennis, aka ping-pong. So as much as I loved the idea back then of being a surgeon, I had this underlying fear and sort of this, this sense that maybe I would not be good at it, that I'd be horrible at it, even though that I fancied myself that way, and that's the person I wanted to be. And in the beginning, I kind of was horrible at it. In medical school, all the guys that I was friends with, who I wanted to hang out with, who my favorite rotation, etc., they were all orthopedic surgeons. And the reason was because they were kind of like fun-loving guys who like sports, and to me that sounded like the perfect marriage, right? I mean, I like sports, I like surgery. The guys, it was like being part of a fraternity or something. It was just fun. The problem was I went on that rotation, and as much as I love these guys, they were also like carpenters. They were guys who loved tools and things. And at my core, I was not a carpenter at all. And I remember being on a rotation, and this was really, again, guys were just great, and they had so much fun. In this rotation, there was an orthopedic surgery resident who I was doing. He was doing a leg amputation. Some guy who's basically, was below the knee amputation. Some guy who basically had a dead leg from diabetes or something. The resident gave me the saw, one of these electric saws to amputate the guy's leg, and having that tool in my hands was not pretty. It was not pretty at all. And all I can say is, fortunately, the leg was supposed to come off anyway. And it was no big loss that it didn't do a very good job. But eventually, I realized that there were certain things that I seemed to be a little bit better at, particularly what we call soft tissue surgery with no bones. I felt like I was better with these sort of more fine movements than using power tools, at least at the time. I mean, that was kind of what I felt like. It may have been really just the case that I just needed more experience with them. But anyway, that's one of the reasons I, ended up first as a neurosurgeon. Although I will say that the first time I ever used a drill, now this is true, it was in medical school, drilling through someone's skull on my first neurosurgery rotation. So, I actually got really good with that drill after a while, and it was really the only power tool I really ever got to like, because it was really the only one that we really used. But I remember getting so confident at one point with this idea of this drill, and I kind of got this confidence, right? And so I literally went to the hardware store and bought a drill and put up shelves in my apartment for the first time. So anyway, okay, so this all sounds totally messed up. I know it, but it's true. But the good news for me was that there was there was this learning curve. I had to get my hands wet, no pun intended. But pretty soon, I became a pretty darn good surgeon. And in hindsight, the fear and anxiety of not being good at surgery was, it was kind of silly. I mean, as it turned out, becoming a good surgeon was really no different than becoming good at anything else in life. And that is true. I mean, it took practice. It's funny. I watch my daughter at school right now, and she's a very talented, smart, 9-year-old. I mean, I have 3 daughters, but I'm talking about the oldest one. And she is really, she's a gifted kid, and she's good at math. But whenever anything becomes like sort of difficult and she doesn't, get it right away, she freaks out and she says, "I'm not good at this." Well, the reality is being good at something is like pushing through that initial layer of it being hard, pushing through it, barreling through it, and doing something over and over again, right? And in the case of most surgical procedures, you sort of do the same maneuvers every case. after my neurosurgery stint, which lasted a couple years, ultimately I ended up leaving because of the hours. I just, I just liked my sleep too much. I couldn't do it. But anyway, I spent some time after that. I trained and ultimately ended up doing facial cosmetic surgery. And I ended up doing a lot of facelifts. And before I did that, I watched some masters do hundreds of operations. And there was this one guy I watched that was particularly interesting to me because his results were so good and so consistent. And what I noticed when I watched him carefully was that he did everything the same way every single time. In fact, I could literally count, and I did count, 6 discrete maneuvers that he did for every patient on each side. And I could recognize them. I wrote them down. This is how he does it. And once in a while I'd ask, why are you doing that? Well, I did it because of this. All right, but there's only really 6 things that you did. Yeah, I guess that's about right. Well, when I started doing my own cases, I did those 6 steps. And for the very first case, believe it or not, to me at least, my results were outstanding. It might have been one of the, best results I've ever seen. And during my career, I did several hundred facelifts, and I did them exactly the same way every single time. I got faster, more precise, and there were fewer and fewer wasted movements. And you know what was funny about it is that I kind of got recognized for that. And my patients, they thought I was some kind of an artist, but in truth, I was more of a robot than an artist. I mean, I am honestly probably one of the least artistic people I know. I can't draw. I can't paint. I can't do anything. I'm like good at doing the same thing over and over again. So anyway, this experience of what I guess I would call mastery was actually really profound for me. I felt like I discovered a larger secret in the process of becoming a very, very good facelift surgeon. And that secret was that you could master just about anything if you cracked the code. And once you cracked the code, you do it over and over again, the same way, every single time. And it just gets better and better. And that's all that mastery is. That's truly what I believe it is. So today, my guest is special, okay? She is really special. She's at a relatively young age. She has become a master at her craft and has shown the same kind of consistency with her financial outcomes as I did at the peak of my surgical career with surgical outcomes. Her name is Janet LePage, and she's actually a computer scientist by training who literally cracked the code to successfully become a master multifamily real estate investor. And we'll learn how she did it when we come back. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, my guest on Wealth Formula Podcast is a rock star. She won't admit it, but her name is Janet LePage, and she is the founder and CEO of Western Wealth Capital, simply one of the best multifamily operators out there, in my opinion, and a group that, because of that, I work with closely, and my investor group, the Accredited Investor Club, works with closely. In 2017, Janet was named Entrepreneur of the Year in the category of Real Estate and Construction by Ernst & Young. In 2016, Janet was named one of Business in Vancouver's 40 under 40. Of course, that means she's younger than me, which, and she was also awarded the, I don't know the French pronunciation here, but the Veuve Clicquot, sounds like a champagne, Canadian New Generation Award, which recognizes young female entrepreneur. Janet, welcome to Wealth Formula Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
So it's great to have you on. Let's start talking about a little bit about your background. I mean, you kind of skyrocketed into this world and have just blown it up. Where do you come from, Janet? I know you're a Canadian, and how did you end up getting into real estate?
Okay, let me see if I can get this started. I grew up in a really small town and came to Vancouver, British Columbia for school. I have a double major in computer science and business, as well as a project management professional certification. I think back when I was 23, I told my dad that I wanted to be the largest mobile home park owner in North America. And, as a mother now, I think back and he went, all right, Jenna, good idea. The time I was, I had started my corporate career, always with some of the biggest companies in Canada. TELUS is the second largest telecommunications company, and moved through my career in for a decade in really large corporations.
Yeah.
But there was something about the passive income. There was something about, I'd watch these other folks, and really I wanted to be the CEO of one of the largest corporations in Canada. That was my goal at that time, as well as apparently, owning a lot of mobile home parks. But what I saw from that was when you don't go to work, you don't get paid. Right. Yeah. And you learn that very quickly. And so I wanted to be able to go to work or not go to work, but always get paid. And that's really where on went, I need to find a way to have passive income. I bought a house when I was young and never really paid attention to it. It was I was about 22, 23. And a year later, you get that property assessment. And I look at it and like the value of the house had gone way up. And I thought, you got to be kidding me. I've done nothing here, but all of a sudden I have this value.
Yeah.
So I took a line of credit and I got a real estate coach. For a year, we went once a week and we went through everything you could imagine with real estate. It was tax liens to commercial, retail, multifamily, flipping, holding, being a shark. And his real model was, Janet, everything's a deal. Everything's a deal. But what makes it a deal? So he didn't let me ever pass on a property. We could never pass on it. We had to make it such that a structure that it was a deal. And we would meet and we probably walked over 100 different properties together. And as we would go through this, and one of the best things that I learned from that is often when we're negotiating an asset, I'll walk away, and we walk away a lot, but I'll get it to a point where I go, if I got these terms, if I got this price, this is a home run deal.
Right.
And I've always approached it that way. So that was a great learning. Moved into 2008. Market is what we thought. The Canadian dollar was at prime, with the US dollar. And I wanted cash flowing homes. And off I went to Phoenix and I bought two. And I thought they were great deals at the time. They weren't. But from that, about 6 months later, I went to the auction steps and I flipped my first multifamily home. I had done my research, I had seen it happen, and I believed that if I could get on there, buy a house, and flip it and put it back on the market for the exact same price as the foreclosure right next door, there were still first-time home buyers. There were still people buying houses, and they would buy mine over the one next door. And so I used my last $10,000 I had, put it on the auction steps, won a house, borrowed the rest at 18% interest, and 20 days later, I flipped that house.
Yeah, interesting.
And that was sort of the beginning of my true real estate career, all while I was growing in my corporate job.
So you ended up, obviously you had an interest in mobile home parks, and you ended up...
I still do.
Yeah, me too. we got to talk about that, because that's something that we really want to get into. But right now, it's primarily it is a multifamily business that you have created alongside with your partner, Dave Steele. Tell us a little bit about why multifamily. Obviously you started with single family houses, presuming the scale was part of the issue, but then there is the mobile home parks. Why multifamily right now?
Why multifamily? And I'm going to answer both. Why multifamily anytime, and why multifamily right now? What I saw with the houses is that when you have a single dwelling or a smaller number of people, if someone's in there, they're paying rent, you're covering your mortgage. If they're not, there is no income. There is no coverage. It's a 0 and 1. Go right back to computer science. It's either you're making money or you're feeding the pot. When you move over to a multifamily property, you will always have vacancies, but you can have a number of people, moved out or not in that property, and you're still covering all your expenses. You do not need to feed that pot. And that was a very good learning when I was flipping those 58 homes over just over 2 years before I got into the multifamily. It was like, gosh, I don't want to be in a risk position of a 0 or 1. I'm either making it or I'm not. In the multifamily, in all real estate spaces, in multifamily and mobile home parks, very similar. You've got a lot of residences on this one parcel of land, is just the reduction in risk. And so much of our program and so much of why we go in multifamily is because I'm very risk adverse. It's something I go, I can control this. I can have this many people not in my property and still make all of my expenses and still cover everything. And I'm not in a risk position. Multifamily right now, when I say, should you be buying multifamily everywhere? No, I wouldn't buy it everywhere. But in the cities where we are buying, it's on the premise of people need jobs. And if there's a job, they need a bed. They need a roof over their head. So if there's more jobs being created than there are beds available, you have a supply and demand issue. In the single family housing market, that means the housing value goes up because more people are bidding on it. In the rental space, it means more people need to rent from you than is available. And why I really like certain cities for rental properties is when you layer on top, hey, there's a lot of job growth. What kind of jobs are going there and what kind of people, what kind of housing will they need? And when you're looking at service level industry, when you're looking at long-term renter, when you're looking at first-time renter, before they can buy a house, if you can marry that in that growth, that's exactly what you're looking for. In Phoenix, as an example, 40% of your immigration of people getting jobs are service level industry or first-time renter. So if you can go and buy the product that aligns with that, you are continuing to keep yourself in a really strong demand for rent position. So that's why I like multifamily, because it's the lowest risk real estate space. And second, when you can align that job growth with the type of product, you've really protected yourself from a lot of outside influences that you can't control.
One of the things that I really like about the way you guys do this, and this obviously stems from your background, is it's scientific, right? This is not a willy-nilly kind of I think we can do a value add situation. How much of that approach that Western Wealth Capital has taken stems from your background as really a computer scientist?
It's funny. I must be able to touch and feel it. A has to equal B, or A plus C equals, A plus B has to equal C, and I can touch it and feel it. In the buildings that we buy, I have competitors or other groups go, yeah, if you paint the building, you're going to be able to raise rents. And I go, yeah, of course, because people are going to think it's more attractive. But how much? How can you quantify that this building being painted is going to get you X? So I do not model the extra things we do, whether it's paint, playground, nicer pool, some fun barbecue or common areas. I can't put a value to that. I know that it's going to make the place more desirable to live, but I do not model a value increase. Where I do model a value increase is if I do a washer and dryer, I am going to make $50 increase in rent. That person, I'm going to spend somewhere between $2,000 to $3,000 installing that washer and dryer, and they're going to pay me $50 a month. That's going to translate to $600 a year. And that's going to translate in value increase in that property somewhere between $12,500 to $15,000 a unit for spending $2,000 to $3,000. It's black and white. I do about 100 a month across our portfolio. We've done thousands of them over the last few years, and I know it. So I can model that in with certainty. And that's the same with an interior upgrade, new appliances, fixtures, flooring, countertops, blinds, a two-tone paint. I know that if I do that, I get anywhere, depending on the package that I put together, $75 to $150 for a spend of about $5,000. And so if I do that enough times, no matter what I do to the rest of the property, I don't need to model in a growth. I know if I do 100 of those, I'm going to make this much in return. And that I can say to my investors and look them in the eye, because I'm doing it every single month in those exact same cities with a building just down the street.
Right. And, and it's interesting the way you talk about that, because I think A lot of people think about real estate, and I think in less scientific terms than that. But ultimately, what we're trying to do here, and what Western Wealth Capital is trying to do here, is to create value, and to be able to put that into terms that is really not, there's strong data that you can use to do that, and the more you do it, you can work out the kinks over time, and then sort of hone in on a formula that works. And that sounds like kind of, the approach that you've taken over time. Is that fair?
Without question, almost to a detriment. And I agree with you. It's your background and training that I need to be able to touch and feel it, because I have to sleep at night and know I can make this happen. So when I put values or numbers to it, I can see it tangibly and feel it, and then I can sleep because I know I can perform that. I've had groups go, but yes, you can make money off putting a spray fountain. And I just think to myself, probably, but I don't know that number exactly. And if I don't know it, it doesn't go in. It is a very scientific approach we take, very much. The art of it is the speed in which we execute.
Right.
Because when you talk about risk, and everyone talks about risk, so we've touched on why multifamily, and why, you see that de-risk by having so many units and people covering the rents as things fluctuate. But the other part is the art in which you create the value. You could create the value very slowly by only doing 1 or 2 washers and dryers a month. You're going to very slowly increase the value of your property, and you're exposing yourself to risk from the value you purchased it at to the value it is right now. But if we can bring in that value very, very quickly and move that property to a new net operating income or an exponentially increased value by installing those washers and dryers very quickly, upgrading units very quickly, doing it while people are living in the unit, forget waiting for them to move out, then you have also on top reduced your risk of your investment very quickly by increasing the value of it without worrying about, is the market going to appreciate? Are we going to be able to increase rents just naturally? Forget all that. Our models work without that. When we're modeling rent growth, we model it at about half of what the market predicts is going to be, because we don't need to do that. But that's the art. And when you look at many of our competitors, or even when I was starting out, I would say I wasn't as fast. The speed wasn't an aha moment until somewhere in our 10th or 15th deal where I was going, gosh, well, if we could do this in half the time, we're going to increase the value of the building in half the time, and we're going to de-risk ourselves. So we continue to hone how quickly we can execute. So to me, that is our art. The science is the black and white. You spend A, you get B, you increase the value C. The art is how quickly you get to the C, so you could tangibly realize your results.
Yeah, and also the speed also, as you say, creates adds to that idea of taking risk off the table, particularly for passive investors, right? For for these accredited investors who are working in these deals. If they have money in the deal, why don't you talk a little bit about sort of your typical, because it's a very stereotypical business model. I've referred to this as the infinite return model, because in part of the getting your money out of the deal and into the next deal kind of approach that passive investors can take. Can you talk a little bit about what makes that possible?
Sure. So, as part of this, when you purchase that asset, when we're able to move it to a new, much higher value without waiting on the market, without waiting on rent growth, because we're moving that net operating income, we're increasing that income by putting in those washers and dryers, by putting in those interior upgrades. So we're moving the value of that asset at a pace that's not normal to market. But with that, then we have what's called supplemental financing. So as part of our loan agreements, we can go in, and at the day we get that loan, they say, okay, we'll lend you actually up to 100% of the purchase price of the property. But right now, because of your debt constraints or where the income's at today, we'll give you 70% loan to value. But every 12 months, you can, or anytime after that, you can come back to us and say, hey, look at our new value, and we will give you back a portion of your proceeds, or we'll increase your debt at that point and refinance that money back to you to continue, because we have moved the overall value of the property up. And what we do is we're able to return that to our investors. And I have investors, investment partners that literally have used the same money on their original deal, and they're into their fourth investment with the same money they had given us back. We're averaging about 20% return of equity within, actually, I'm wrong. Sorry. It's about 50% within 20 months.
Yeah.
And continues up. We have buildings that
within how many months? Within how many months?
20.
Okay. Wow. So let me just, because I am very familiar with this, let me recap. Because this is what I find just, fantastic. We always talk about these terms, Janet, in our on this show. We talk about velocity and leverage, right? Velocity is how quickly you get your money back. Leverage is obviously using bank money and whatever other source of money that you can use to increase your returns. So what Janet is saying here is that, just to recap here, is first of all, typically what you see in models a lot of times, and it's not uncommon for a group to say, okay, we're going to create these value add components, and then 5 or 6 years down the line, we're going to do a refinance. And that, because we've added so much equity, we've added so much value to this property, and the net operating income goes up, we're going to return, the capital to the investor. They still have ownership, but they might get, most of their, if not all of their capital off the table at that point, rendering two things. It's taking that initial risk off the table for a passive investor, but the other thing is it allows that same money to get deployed into the next deal, and therefore creating a tremendous amount of velocity of money. What Janet is pointing out is something that's really unique, and I had never seen this before, which is a type of loan that allows, effectively, you don't need to refinance. All you need to do is you get appraisal. So to Janet's point about speed, the quicker you can just create value, you can start pulling out equity based on how much value you've created. And what she's telling you is that instead of waiting typically 5 or 6 years to get your money back at all, within about 20 months they're averaging half of your money back in your pocket. Well, guess what? That can go right back into a deal. Did I get that right, Janet? I'm sorry to... Yeah.
You did. We've had, and every deal does a little bit different, but we've had as high as 75% of our money refinanced in 1 year.
Yeah.
To sometimes it's 24 months before we go to it. It really depends on the business plan. But yes, we've had great success, and it's a big part of our program. And it's really neat to watch our investment partners that we've had for 4 years now, seeing them actually continue to put that money. That's the Warren Buffett model, right?
Yep.
Of infinite wealth is using that same dollar, continuing to have your ownership in the first asset and buying your next and your next.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is in a nutshell the market. I'll toot your horn. The last time I saw anything, the average annualized return because of this model was about 32% annualized return, which is phenomenal. Obviously, past performance does not dictate future, but that is something worth noteworthy to talk about. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about was, obviously there's a great track record here. You're someone who has lived and experienced through 2008. And, I don't think anybody thinks that we're going to have another 2008 per se, but there are market cycles. There are cap rate compressions and decompressions. And you've alluded to this a little bit, but talk a little bit about that, because that's a question that we frequently get from people, is saying, a lot of groups, or a lot of people or investors have, for the most part, decided that real estate right now is too expensive to buy in any market. And so they're waiting for cap rates to decompress, for market cycles to turn. What is your sort of your rebuttal to that argument, and what does the model do to help buffer some of that potential downside?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's funny. You hear the constant thing about the cycle and where we at when we're buying. What I think a lot of people don't see, or what I know, is what we don't buy, what we walk away from. If I was just entering a market where I was, a nobody, or, we're the second largest multifamily owner in Phoenix. And in the history of Phoenix, no one's ever entered that market and within 3 years become, a nobody where I could barely get a broker to return my call to being the second largest owner. And that's really fared us very well in not only Phoenix, but the other four markets that we're in. It shows that we're here to play. And so we're able to go in and look at a lot of potential opportunities, and we walk away from more than we ever have before. So that's number one. You have to find the diamond in the rough. You had to kiss a lot of frogs. I do a course where it's, the title is, you got to kiss a lot of frogs. Yeah. And people don't see that. You only see the success stories that come out of it, but how much time, energy, and front end work is put into finding the right deal, especially at this time, you have to be that much more diligent. So that would be my number one thing. Number two is when we talk about washers and dryers, and when we talk about interior upgrades, this has nothing to do with where rent growth is. This has very little to do with, yes, cap rate compression. If you believe, if you believe in that, but our ability to take this unit and move it to this price, forget all other factors, is true. That is black and white. And so what we have to find is these assets where majority is untouched, what I call a classic blank slate, ready for us to do our program on. And we're able to achieve those returns. We also model in increased, interest rates, which I believe are much higher than what we're going to be. We model in much higher vacancy rates than they're predicting or even exist. We model in, all of these other places, higher delinquency than's ever there. We model in half the rent growth that the market's predicting. So you've got all of these, I call it like the lemon tree, right? So you've got never squeeze all your lemons dry. But when I'm modeling, I've got lemon over here, lemon over here, lemon over here, lemon over here that I have not squeezed to anywhere close to what the market's performing to. So if I'm wrong on one assumption, that's okay, because I've underperformed on all these other assumptions. So really my model is padded all over the place for what I don't know to be. But what I do know to be is I can get the $50 in that rent increase. I can get the rent increase for that unit increase. The other thing, that the metric that I didn't share, which I do believe plays into all of this that we're talking about, is basically your affordability index. Every time I go for dinner with another group, a large group similar to us, and I say, guys, what do you look for when you're, picking your markets? Because I'm always curious what metrics other people follow. What are you underwriting for? What's your prediction in interest rate increases? We talk about these things. And one of the things that's always prevailing is affordability index. What that actually means is how much a person has to pay for their cost of living out of every dollar they make in income. And if you look at the cities that we're in, there are many of the lowest affordability, or highest affordability, if you will, on the index. Phoenix is 22 cents on the dollar, whereas the United States is over 40%. So 40 cents of every dollar goes to paying for your housing. So in the cities that we're in, there is a lot of room for people to be able to afford better housing, those rent increases that, I get these investors go, but people can't afford the rent increases. I go, actually, when you look at all these other cities they could live in, their affordability to be able to pay more for housing is absolutely there. And so that's another piece that's not talked about in this big global, maybe there's going to be a downturn, maybe there's not. We're picking cities where really there's a lot of room to go in affordability, and people have that to pay at this time as we're seeing, these job growth.
Yeah. And to that extent, if you're adding value, if you're increasing rents, if you're increasing income on the property, I guess in that scenario, the worst case scenario is you hold on to the property and cash flow and then sell it when you get a better price, right? I mean, isn't that kind of the downside?
It is, especially at the speed at which we go from point A, I just purchased it, to point B is this whole nother level where you've got this much more increased cash flow, this much greater value. Absolutely. You can ride the wave. If you just buy something and do nothing, and now all of a sudden prices go down, well, now you're at a loss on your basis. But if we go from here to here, we've already pulled a huge amount of that risk out. That yes, maybe we go back a bit in value, but we haven't introduced risk of loss.
Right.
Which is the biggest thing. Maybe you won't make the 32% or the 20% that we're showing in our pro forma, but we're also really far from a loss position. And that's a great place to be.
I've always kind of explained this in a way that I think what I like about the model is that it's fairly moderate leverage on the inside, right? About 32, 33% on average from what I've seen. But then immediately what you're doing is you're creating value. And what that does is effectively helps to deleverage further. So you're taking moderate leverage and then you're immediately going into value add, which deleverages further. And that creates this buffer that you're talking about.
Correct. Exactly.
So obviously I'm a big fan of what you're doing. Tell us a little bit also about some of the there's some really good things that Western Wealth Capital has done in the communities that it has touched. Can you talk a little bit about that and why that's important to you?
The real estate industry has operated the same way for a long time. It's about making money. And I can't tell you how many properties I've walked onto and you look at it and the current owner doesn't care one bit about who lives in Unit 101, could care less. Worse, as a mother, as a female, doesn't care that the lights are burnt out so that when she's got her kids and it's after dark and carrying her groceries, doesn't care that it's scary. It is scary as a female. I know this. Doesn't care that there's not a cover over the playground. So in the summertime, the kids are burning and you're supposed to sit somewhere and watch your children. Doesn't think about those things. And when I came on and started doing this, not at first it was about making money for me. And don't get us wrong, we're here to manage the wealth of our investors, partners, and increase that wealth. But what I saw was you can do both. And not only can you do both, but if you do one well, you're going to create greater wealth.
Right.
And so what we have at Western Wealth Capital, and many companies, they call it the three-legged stool. One of them is, creating wealth for our investment partners without question. But the how is what I'm here to show the real estate industry that you can do it differently. You can do this on human terms and not just term sheets alone. And this industry, I'm hoping, is part of who we are, can start to see what we are doing and follow lead and do it on a more human, what I call more human terms. So when you start putting in the lights, when you change those playgrounds, when you make a community safe and a place where, these lifetime renters or long-term renters have pride of rentership, they tell their friends and they don't move. Do you know the single greatest expense you have on a property is someone moving in and someone moving out? If you can increase the rents for the person currently living in that property without them moving, you are winning all over the place. And to do that, you need them to have pride of rentership. And you know what? When they move out, the walls aren't going to be kicked in. They cared about the interior. So even when we do have to turn that unit, improve it, it's not beat up because they were proud to live there. So that's one piece. And I'll talk a little bit about the programs we have for that. The second one is, property management, the people that live every day and work on those properties and do the plumbing and do the landscaping and pick up the property and have to interact with these residents every single day. They have hard jobs. They're hard work. We are in cities that are hot in the summer and you're outside all day long. And you're not recognized very often by the owners of these properties. So your morale overall, generally speaking, is not very high in property management. But just imagine if we gave them a workplace, an environment where they could go home and tell their children, hey, I was recognized today. I have maintenance staff on some of our properties where when someone does a great job, it's recognized and an email goes out to the Western Wealth Capital executive team recognizing them along with the owners of the property management company, the regionals of the property management company. And we all reply and say, wow, thank you for what you've done. And we've had comments back where I've done this for 28 years and I don't have a single owner that has ever even shaken my hand, said thank you. That, it's unbelievable. Think of how much that person makes such a difference in your overall expenses in making our residents' property a better place. So if we can show that you can do these things, and you can, we're proving it. Our results are at the top of the charts. I can't tell you how many brokers, when I come in and they go to look at our properties to sell, and they go, how are you operating this so cheap? My gosh, you have some of the highest rents. And I said, because I'm just treating people well and being focused on it. But the programs that we have on top of that, we have 2 flagship programs. One is called We've Got Your Back. And in the summer, every property on the same day from 4 to 6 we make available a backpack with the local school supply list for that property, stuff with all the school supplies they need, so each child can start the first day of school off on the right foot. And we don't buy those. The property management employees on that property go to the Walmart. They pack them themselves, because this is a gift that they can give to these children and these families that they see every day. And if they can't afford that backpack, or they could use a leg up, we're able to hand it to them. So we are creating a community, and we are also creating the possibility that a child can show up confident. And we all know that if they're confident, we're making space for them to learn. And that's an unbelievable thing. That we're able to give both, but the payback to our financial wealth is unbelievable at the same time as creating the right thing to do. The other thing is rent-free Christmas. So we allow the management staff to get together, and they have exactly 2 minutes to pick a family on a property that could use free rent in the month of December, so that they could take that money and create a Christmas memory that they otherwise wouldn't be able to have. Now, what does that do? And why do I say 2 minutes? Because that staff knows. They know that family. They interact with them. They've seen them. They've seen their hardship. One of the families was a mom with 3 children, and she became a widow within 6 weeks unexpectedly, this year. So she's trying to figure out how to be a single mom, how to, heal herself, never mind her children, and try to get through Christmas and afford everything. And we're able to give her this gift. And what that does with our community, our property management community, is they feel like they've been part of helping someone. And you know how hard they work on that property because of that?
Yeah. It's
a win all around. And so over the last 3 years, we've been able to give back to our properties over $170,000 in giving. That's created tremendous heart, really helped people in need, and also drove financial gain for our investors. And to me, that's the perfect 3-legged stool. It's a win on all fronts, and it's a way to show this entire industry that you can do this on human terms and not term sheets alone.
Truly a win-win situation. Janet, again, I want to thank you very much for being on Wealth Formula Podcast today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
We'll be right back. Thanks, Janet. That was awesome. You did
Too
great.
long? I can shorten down the giving part if you want me to.
No. Don't worry. I thought that was great. And you're totally wrong about not being as as Tim and Dave. You have your own kind of passionate approach, which I think is very compelling. So.
Oh no, I mine just comes from a different angle. You know what I mean? They're just, and it's why I hope, as you see, Dave, we're great partners because we're so different.
Yeah.
We wake up worried about different things. I mean, I never knew that our partnership would grow to what it was. You don't know.
Right.
And nor did I. I mean, we just.
Okay. Now, welcome back to the show, everyone. If you want to learn more about the Western Wealth Model, you certainly can go to wealthformula.com, go to the investment opportunities category, and watch the webinar on infinite returns. That is the model that they are so good at. And for those of you in Investor Club, you already know about Western Wealth Capital. We've done a lot with them, and in fact, we're in the middle of an equity raise right now. I should also point out that Janet's partner, Dave Steele, will be speaking along with Tom Wheelwright and Ken McElroy, the Titans of Multifamily Real Estate, which is our first Wealth Formula meetup. You can go to wealthformulaevents.com to check that out. I want to see you there. I want to see you there on the 1st in the evening. I want us to get some drinks, hang out all on the 2nd, and have a good time and talk to some really, really smart people while we learn. So do that. And finally, if you're an accredited investor and these kinds of things are appealing to you, it's time to go to wealthformula.com, sign up for the accredited investor list, and fill out the survey, and we'll talk on the phone. All right. So definitely do that. Investing is something, if you're sitting on the sidelines, you're intimidated. It's like anything else. You just do it and you get good at it and you master it. Anyway, that's it for me today. This is Buck Joffrey with Wealth Formula Podcast, signing off.